I'll say this. We finally knocked out Cleveland. We finally swept the Cleveland Guardians in a tense, thrilling series. And we are going to spend a lot of time talking about this because even though the Tigers have a comfortable lead in their division, and even though as of the time of this recording, the biggest competition in their division is not the Cleveland Guardians, who've actually lost 10 in a row, what we saw over the weekend was a huge series. And a huge moment, I think, for this ball club. And I am going to talk about all of that. Tigers go 4-2 this week on the 6-game road trip. We are going to discuss that, but let's go ahead and fast forward here through the show notes at Castellani2014 on Twitter. You can follow us on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button in audio format on Apple Podcasts, in audio format on Spotify. And, of course, CastellaniContent.com is getting updated every single day with what Austin and I create all the time. All right, let's move on. Like I said, 4-2. Week for the Detroit Tigers, and it didn't start out great. They lost 2 out of 3 against a Nationals team that, pretty quickly, that series loss aged poorly. It's not to say that the Nationals were playing good baseball, but they just got their bell rung by the Boston Red Sox at home over the weekend. And just recently, just a few moments ago, as of the time I'm recording this, they fired their manager and general manager. So Davey Martinez and Mike Rizzo, 2 guys who were key pieces of their 2019 championship run, they're gone. So I guess they can enjoy the fact that their last series win came against the Detroit Tigers. It was a frustrating series, but it was one of those things, and this just happens during a 162-game season, and it's why, while, record does matter, obviously, it's I'm not going to say it's the only thing that matters, but there are certain instances where you need to take a closer look under the hood and look at things like run differential, or just even look at the box score, because in a playoff format, you're not going to make Canely wear it the way that they did. Canely had his worst outing of the year. And then in another one of those games, Dietrich Ends pitched. And no disrespect to the guy at all, but that's the grind of 162. You have to fill spots. Sometimes rosters kind of thin out the deeper you get into a season. So it was a frustrating series loss to the Nationals, but it was one of those things where I was willing to accept it if they bounced back strong against Cleveland. And I'm sure there's people who are watching this wondering, why are you so obsessive about the Cleveland series? We are, I think, 15 games up on Cleveland now, so meaning we are 12 coming into that series. Let me explain this. And it's very comparable to me to the Michigan State rivalry in football. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. There were certain years, I'm going to make the analogy here. There were certain years during the D'Antonio era where Michigan State, talent-wise, was just better than Michigan. But there were a lot of years, okay? 2017, 2021, 2020, where Michigan talent-wise was better, even in some ways quite a bit better. I mean, 2021, they made the playoff. And yet Michigan would get into that game, and they would do things that they didn't do against any other opponent. And it was like this with Ohio State, too, for a long time. But I always go back to Michigan State because it's, I don't know, it's in-state, the way that this one's kind of in division with Cleveland. And often the separation to me, when I could tell if a Michigan team really had the killer instinct or how they were going to play against the Buckeyes, was often determined by how they'd play against Sparty. And I'm going to use an analogy inside an analogy here. 2016, I remember Michigan State had the worst Michigan State football team of my lifetime. They went 3-9. They were an absolute mess. Michigan went into East Lansing. I think they were 7-0, 8-0, ranked 3rd in the country maybe. And they were favored by 20, maybe even 30 points coming into that game, and they won by 9. They played a completely uninspired game that they won by virtue of the fact that they were more talented at literally every position. But it didn't feel great. Fast forward 7 years, Michigan is in the exact same place. Michigan State is in the exact same place, right? They are now, they had just fired Mel Tucker. Michigan was ranked 2nd in the country. They were undefeated. Huge favorites playing in East Lansing. This time, it was a 49-0 game. And while there was never any doubt in the back of my mind that Michigan wasn't going to win that game, I remember coming away from that ballgame thinking, that's killer instinct, okay? Winning a fight is a lot of fun. Winning a fight and knocking somebody out is a million times better. That's what I wanted out of this series against Detroit. Look, the record speaks for itself. Detroit's a much better team than Cleveland. Okay, it's been that way all season. We know this to be true. The record doesn't lie. The numbers don't lie. But there's something about the way the Tigers often play against the Guardians, where the ball just seems to bounce Cleveland's way. Detroit can't seem to hit their pitching. Every 50-50 play, every clutch moment, it seems to always go Cleveland's way. And while I could have used a few more hits, especially in the first 2+ games of this series, the way that Detroit beat Cleveland in this 3-game set was so wonderful and so beautifully demoralizing in the best way possible. Demoralizing if you're a Guardian fan. If you're a Tiger fan, woohoo! But they won a 2-1 game in which Cleveland threatened a million times in the latter part of the game and couldn't get over the hump. They lost a 1-0 game where Casey Mize was just brilliant. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. And then they won what I think was maybe the most ridiculous, random, crazy Tiger game of the entire year. Tarek Skubal pitches 7 scoreless. He's gotten now, I think, against Cleveland this year, 16 innings and 23 strikeouts. I mean, just ridiculous stuff. You get to the 9th, you're down 1-0. Stephen Kwan again gets to you. You're about to lose 1-0 with Emmanuel Clase on the mound to close it out. And Zach McKinstry comes in after Spencer Torkelson gets hit by a pitch, swipes second, goes to third on a ground out, and then scores on a wild pitch. And then, in the 10th inning against Cade Smith, who's unhittable, they scored 6 runs. Trey Sweeney, of all people, hit a 3-run home run the other way. Riley Green hit one. The floodgates just opened, and it reminded me of, and maybe we're back in the good old days, but it reminded me of the old good old days, like the 2011 to 2014 era, when the Tigers would have Cleveland and they'd kind of be, treading water for a little bit. They might be a few games up in the division, and then they'd go to Progressive Field and just knock them out. That's what we saw. Cleveland's now lost 10 in a row, and after that game on Sunday, that's one of those, no matter where you're at in the season, you look back on and say, how in the world did we not win that game? And it was so satisfying for a lot of reasons. I mean, Cleveland has just tortured the Tigers. Now, of course, when we were terrible, the Tigers got tortured by a lot of people. But there's something about this Cleveland group, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I love Cleveland fans. I love Cleveland as a sports city. And I found myself rooting for the core that they had when they had Lindor and Kluber and Carrasco, and obviously J-Ram was there at the time. I really liked those teams. I don't like this team. I think they're incredibly cheap and pesky. But even beyond that, I actively denounce organizations that make moves that are detrimental to their club and paint it under the guise of strategy. And that's exactly what they did this offseason. You can't convince me that the Josh Naylor for Slade Sassoni trade was anything other than just an opportunity to dump Josh Naylor before he got paid more money. And so I came into the season being like, great, Cleveland's, they're waving the white flag. Awesome. And yet they still, when they play the Tigers, we can't score and we get runners on and we can't drive them in, or we just get shut down. And that game on Sunday really felt like a tipping point for this entire division. And I would say in a lot of ways a tipping point in that rivalry, just because I feel like it's two organizations that are headed in drastically different directions. Cleveland made the ALCS last year. They beat the Tigers in the playoffs. And you can say what you want about Chris Ilitch or Scott Harris and whatever cheapness you feel like they might display. And yeah, they didn't go out and get Bregman, but you know what they did? They got Gleyber Torres, right? They went out and got Canely. They made moves, and guys got better. The young players on this team got better. And I'm sorry, but this Cleveland core, I don't know why I'm spending so much time talking about Cleveland. I'm not going to spend much longer. But this Cleveland core that they raved about with Schneemann and Rocchio and Bo Naylor, these guys aren't any good. Once you get past Carlos Santana in that lineup, I mean, it's the worst lineup in the sport. So glorious to see. That was a killer instinct moment for this Tigers team. And I want to just backtrack here and talk about a few guys because there were some big moments over the weekend. But I want to start with Casey Mize because I've mentioned this before, but this team has had so many resurgence seasons, whether it's Javi or McKinstry, who I'll discuss, or Dingler, who's been really good, or Torque. And I really feel like the guy who's been the most consistent and most resurgent of that group, sans maybe Z-Mac, has been Casey Mize. I mean, Casey has been a huge, huge part of this team this year. And, both him and Torque had excellent spring trainings. And we wondered, if this can carry over it changes the entire dynamic of this organization potentially, not just for this year, but for the next several years. And when you look at this rotation, look, Tarek Skubal is unbelievable. He's unbelievable. I think that this is the most dominant stretch that we've seen by a starting pitcher in Major League Baseball. I said this in my postgame video the other day, probably since Jake Arrieta had that year where he was just untouchable in the second half of 2015. I mean, this is just insane. He doesn't walk anybody. He strikes out everybody. He's going deep into games. He is the best pitcher in the world. I got a text from a buddy of mine who has very good baseball opinions, somebody I trust and listen to. He said, am I crazy for thinking Skubal's better than Verlander at this point? And honestly, in terms of run prevention and just pure dominance, I don't think anyone's crazy for having that take. He's just ridiculous. But we expected Jack Flaherty to come in and be the second man in this rotation. He hasn't been. Now, I'm still a Jack Flaherty truther. I still think that he can find it. In fact, in the latter part of his start against Washington, he did look better, had some legit swing and miss. But he has not been what they expect him to be. Reese Olson, who I think is wonderful, but Reese Olson missed 2 months. The best ability is availability. God bless the guy. I think he's a phenomenal pitcher, and I think he's going to get better as this year goes along. But those were key games, key series that he missed. Your number 2 starter has been Casey Mize. And do the peripherals indicate that there will be some sort of regression at some point? Yeah. I mean, his FIP isn't amazing, though it's good. But I think that as far as the pitcher we've watched, just the eye test, we've seen a completely different, much more confident version of Casey Mize. And the obvious reason is, hey, he might finally be healthy. And that's part of it. But last year, in his first year back from Tommy John, I really felt like we saw a pitcher who didn't have total faith in his stuff. And maybe I'm seeing things that weren't there. But to me, the number one sign of a guy who's not particularly confident is someone who's nibbling. There's being wild. Okay, if wild just means you don't have good mechanics and you're not repeating your delivery. But nibbling is you're around the zone. You're just missing a little bit. Because you're afraid that you're going to leak one over the heart of the plate and it's going to get crushed. Mize has been pitching. He's been pitching with a real aggression this year. The strike throwing's been better. And yeah, is he going to be a high volume swing and miss guy in his career? No, probably not. But he has stepped up so much for this organization. And the start that he had against Cleveland on Saturday, I think it's the best outing of his career. And I think that you saw not just a different version of Mize so far this season, but I think that you've seen a manager in AJ Hinch who's put more faith in his staff. I mean, he let Mize finish the 7th inning there when they had a runner on second. He's trusting these guys again. And we'll see what happens in the second half. But a huge reason why this team finds themselves in such good standing, especially as it pertains to the AL Central division, is because of their pitching. And once you get past Tarek, their most important starter has been Casey. He's been really good. And even he missed some time on the IL, but he's had an excellent campaign. Thought the bullpen was a million times better in the series against Cleveland. I got to mention Cleveland's offense is bad. I mean, I already brought that up. But one other guy I wanted to talk about, and he did not make the All-Star team, at least not yet. There's a few guys that are probably going to be injured. I know Pena's going to be injured. I don't think Bregman's going to be back. So there's a chance he still makes it. But Zach McKinstry, I think, had a moment that Tiger fans are just going to love for a long time on Sunday when he comes into the game after Torque gets hit by a pitch. He swipes second, originally called out, which was ridiculous, right? I mean, he's very clearly safe, gets to third, and then gets a good jump at third base and scores on a wild pitch by Clase to tie it. Just another moment for a guy who's had so many great moments. And I said this in my postgame video, but I think it's worth reiterating. This McKinstry, to me, if you watch the games and you're aware of the narratives, which not everyone is, that's just the case. I mean, if you're selecting the All-Star reserves, you're not in it for every single Tiger game. You're not necessarily aware of the day in, day out, but there have been few players to me really in the American League that have been as important as Zach McKinstry has been to this team. And that might sound crazy. And I get it. And he's not Glaber. He's not Riley Green. He's not one of these big thumpers, but you hoped with the injuries they had coming into the campaign, you hoped that McKinstry could be a guy who was just, giving him a fighter's chance in these games. He's not going to have Parker's defense. He's not going to have Wenzel or Matty V's bat, but if he can just contribute a little bit as a fill-in role, he'll be something. He's done more than that. He's played third base. He played first base yesterday in a high leverage situation. He has become the ultimate utility guy for this team. And of course, he's another guy where peripherally you look around, batted ball data probably isn't incredible. He's had kind of a lot of weak singles, but he's had moments. And for a utility guy like that, it's huge. He is this team's version. Now, this guy was I think probably the biggest not victim, but the biggest beneficiary of the Astros sign stealing stuff. He's become this team's version of what Marwin Gonzalez was on the Astros in 2017. People forget that Astros team had Altuve in an MVP season. They had Correa, they had Springer. It was Marwin Gonzalez that led them in RBIs that year. And while McKinstry is not going to lead this team in RBI, I think when you look at the number of moments that he's had here and the way that he's produced and the way that he's filled in, it's an awesome story. And I hope that somebody drops out of the All-Star game so he can fill in, because he's truly become, I think, one of the favorites of this fan base. He's a scrappy guy. And I think when you look at McKinstry is an isolated, not incident, but an isolated case. I think when you take a bigger step back and kind of look at where this organization is at, this is something that I've talked about many, many times, which is the really good organizations just find guys. Now, you want stars. You do. And you need stars, and you got to develop stars. But sometimes it's not about developing the stars. Sometimes it's about fixing the pieces you already have. I just talked about the Houston Astros. They went through that stretch where they were awful and they were tanking for draft capital. And you know what? They got Springer out of that. They got Correa out of that. They got Bregman out of that. But they also, at one point out of, I think it was Venezuela, got this little known second baseman, this 5'6" second baseman for pennies on the dollar, who ended up becoming Jose Altuve. Right? And because they had an organization that had the pieces in place that knew how to develop guys, that knew what they were doing, they watched this guy blossom and grow from this kind of high batting average slap singles hitter to a power hitting all-time great second baseman. The really good organizations just find guys. And I think this is where Scott Harris really deserves a lot of credit, because McKinstry's been awesome, right? But when you look over the last several years, both when this team has been successful and when they haven't been, there's been a lot of scrap heap pieces that the rest of the league didn't think much of, that Scott Harris took a flyer out on, that have been key pieces to varying levels, but key pieces to this organization's success. Obviously, McKinstry is like the standout one, but you know who has the biggest Tigers hit in the last decade? It ain't Riley. It's the guy that you got because he could hit lefties. It was Andy Ibanez. And I know he got sent down, but you can't tell me the guy didn't give you some big moments. Tyler Holton was a waiver guy that they just picked up and took a flyer out on. Z-Mac has been another example of that. Jahmai Jones has had some huge moments already this season, a small sample size against left-handed hitting. That is something, even when they were really rolling under Dombrowski, this organization has never done. And when we talk about player development, I think very often we talk about it as drafting, coming up through the system, like what's going on with Clark and McGonigal and Briseno. And you know what? That's very important. But sometimes you can find a diamond in the rough and turn him into something. And I think when you look at the number of guys on this team that were either nobodies or afterthoughts who have become key pieces of this club, that to me is a sign of a really good management. And it's why when people say, hey, can you give Al Avila some credit? He drafted some of these guys. I'm like, no, you can't, because the production that we're seeing from these guys is totally unlike any of the production we saw, or lack of production that we saw from guys in the Avila era. What you have when you have a young player, or just any player in your organization, it's like having a newborn baby. And you could look at this thing and be like, well, this thing's got a ton of potential. This kid's got a ton of potential, right? If he gets raised right, if we feed him the right foods, if we don't drop him on his head, he could really become something. The problem is, in the last regime, you had a lot of guys that were dropping babies. And now you have people say, okay, let's actually put this guy through the right system. Let's treat him well. Let's give him the right foods. Let's make sure he goes through the right training regimen and everything. And what you end up with are players that all of a sudden are contributing, and a lineup all of a sudden that teams don't want to face. That exists for pitchers and position players. It's very important. One other thing that I just want to bring up, because obviously I talked about it with McKinstry, but the Tigers have 4 All-Stars, potential for more. They are going to have probably all 4 of those starting in the All-Star game. Gleyber Torres, Riley Green, Javier Baez in center, and of course, Tarek Skubal, who is most likely to be starting the All-Star game for the American League. I can't imagine they go with anybody else. I mean, Tarek's just been incredible. And it's a national thing too. Like everyone knows how good Tarek is. It's not like last year you could almost make the argument he was kind of this like hidden gem. No, the guy's just been ridiculous. I want to focus on Javi, and I made a whole video about this. Look, people are gonna call me a curmudgeon. I don't really think Javi deserved to be an all-star. Okay. Like, and I'm not even speaking about that in terms of my distrust of him as a player. It's just a pure numbers standpoint thing. Now, I think generally speaking, the fan voting got it right this year. And hey, that's what it is. It's fan voting. It's popularity contest. I do have to lead off with that, though. Like, there are better players who are not starting this game. At the same time, the question that I asked and was asked many times coming into this campaign was, does Javi make it through the season? And my prediction really for the better part of 2 years was that at some point this season, regardless of how successful the Tigers were, they were going to at some point have to pull the plug on Javier Baez, the way that they did with Kenta Maeda, the way that they did with Andy Ibanez sending him down, where it's like, look, man, we've given you shot after shot. Now, of course, Javi, you have the contract situation, but we understand what we're paying you. The team is going one direction and you're going the other. Please leave. We'll cut the check. Goodbye. The fact that he has not only stayed here, but found his way in the All-Star game and done so starting in center field is as remarkable an individual turnaround as we've seen in this city. And, people are saying, making comparisons to Jared Goff. The thing is, Jared Goff was never bad. Like that was, I think that was generally kind of a false narrative. Javi was bad. Okay. Like worst hitter in baseball, bad. The fact that, like, if you would have told me, truly, like, what's his OPS right now? Like 760, 770 something. If you would have told me it was 670 this year, I would have been surprised. Legitimately. The fact that he's, like, had these moments and he's filled in, he's been a genuine surprise. And he deserves a lot of credit because I think that when you get to a point where you're struggling the way that he was, I think one of the easiest things that any person or any athlete can do is lose belief in themselves. And he never did. He never did. There is a fine line between confidence and arrogance, but in this game especially, give me a guy who always thinks that he can produce as opposed to a guy who thinks that he's going to be trending downward. Because ultimately, and this just proves, and I tweeted this out, but this is very true. I love this game. I love baseball so much. I'll always love baseball. And I love analyzing baseball. I love predicting baseball, what's going to happen, indicators, advanced statistics. Something like Javier Baez starting the All-Star game at center just proves one thing. And this is what makes this game awesome. In general, no one really knows anything. Now, you can have people that are more right than others. You can have people who might know a little bit less anything than everybody else. But there are elements to this game that you just cannot predict. And this would not happen in any other sport, right? This is the equivalent of like if Joey Harrington in 2005 turned into Patrick Mahomes. It just doesn't make any sense. And it's why we love this game, and it's why we love this team. And I think that you give Javi a lot of credit, but you also give the organization a lot of credit for seeing something in him that clearly we did. I thought he was just cooked. I didn't think the ability was there anymore. And while his remedial understanding of the strike zone is still annoying, he's proven that the ability's there. The power's there, the clutch factor's there, and the athleticism, especially whether he's playing short or center field or any position, is there. And beyond all of that, the willingness to do anything he needs to do to help this team. That's very admirable. I'll always respect him for that. So, yeah, let's see. Anything else? No, I think that will do it for today's show. YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, at Castellani2014 on Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastellaniContent.com, being updated every single day. Peter Flaherty from Baseball America will be joining us on Chris and Company. I'm going to be asking him all about the Tigers system. I'm going to be asking him all about the upcoming MLB draft. I'm going to talk about Kevin McGonigal. It's a pretty good interview for the baseball heads out there. And obviously this is just a magical time of year. So we appreciate all of your support and everything. Continue to follow us, like us, growing on TikTok as well. Don't, pay attention to that. And of course, shout out to my friend Austin Sisler, who continues to do a wonderful job behind the lens. One more thing. If you saw on Twitter, Austin and I cut an advertisement for Orange Insoles. Go to that website, use the promo code Chris10, you get 10% off. Support us, help us out. It's a local business, and we had a ton of fun shooting the ad. Austin did such a bang-up job with the production part. He did such a great job, and people responded to it really well. So go there, promo code Chris10. I appreciate you guys. I'll talk to y'all real soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.